For the last several days, with only security guards parked outside. The house, as you said, belongs to Annie Guthrie and her husband, but it has been empty for the last several days with only security guards parked outside, and they remain here tonight.
Authorities are now searching around Annie Guthrie's house. Annie Guthrie is Nancy's daughter, Savannah's sister. They are searching the brush around her house. They're questioning neighbors nearby. It seems like they're honing in on a subject. It seems like they're honing in on a potential suspect or possibly someone that's connected to Annie or to Moss.
Despite having already passed through great trials of pain and grief, we are always going to be merely human, just normal human people who need our mom. Mama, if you're listening, we need you to come home. We miss you.
The dry Arizona air hung heavy over the Catalina foothills on the night of January 31, 2026. For Annie Guthrie, it was supposed to be the end of a typical warm family evening. She and her husband, Tommaso Shini, had hosted her 84-year-old mother, Nancy, for dinner, a routine of comfort and connection. Factual reports confirm that at approximately 9:48 p.m., Tommaso pulled his vehicle into Nancy's driveway to drop her off. In the eyes of a narrative, this moment is the anchor. Annie was the last person to see her mother in a domestic setting, and Tommaso was the last person to see her alive before she stepped into her home. By 9:50 p.m., the garage door hummed shut, sealing Nancy inside. At that moment, everything seemed normal. There were no red flags, no frantic phone calls, and no signs of the chaos that would follow. However, in any investigation, the last seen status carries a heavy, often unfair, weight. Because Annie and Tommaso were the final links to Nancy's known whereabouts, they naturally became the starting point for the Pima County Sheriff's Department. Investigators look for the ripple effect. Who was there, who saw her last, and what was the mood? For Annie, being the loving daughter who provided that final meal also meant being the person who had to answer the most grueling questions. As the sun rose on February 1, and Nancy failed to appear for her virtual church service, the silence from her home became deafening. The factual reality that she left behind her car, her phone, and, most critically, her daily medication transformed a quiet Sunday into the start of a national nightmare. Annie found herself at the epicenter of a storm she never asked for, where proximity to the victim was mistaken by the public for proximity to the crime. In the immediate wake of Nancy's disappearance, a heavy, suffocating silence descended over the Guthrie family. To the casual observer or the armchair detectives on social media, this silence was interpreted as shocking or evasive. However, looking at the factual progression of the case, the silence from Annie Guthrie and her family was not a sign of guilt, but a byproduct of a specialized, high-stakes investigation. When a person vanishes under suspicious circumstances, especially when evidence of a struggle is found, law enforcement often advises the inner circle to remain quiet to protect the integrity of the search. The Pima County Sheriff's Department quickly discovered a chilling detail. The front door of Nancy's home had been tampered with. There was forensic evidence that the door had been pried open. For Annie, the silence was likely a mix of profound trauma and a directive from investigators. Every word spoken to the press is a word that a potential kidnapper could use to their advantage. In cases involving an armed and masked suspect, as seen on nearby doorbell footage, the prime suspect in the eyes of the family isn't a relative, it is the stranger in the shadows. Public suspicion often feeds on the absence of information. Because Annie and Tommaso did not immediately go on a media blitz, the internet began to fill the vacuum with why. Why weren't they pleading on camera? Why were they letting the sheriff do all the talking? Factually, the family was working behind the scenes, offering a $10,000 reward and cooperating fully with the Silver Alert protocols. Their silence was a tactical choice, one meant to keep the focus on the search efforts rather than a public spectacle. Furthermore, investigators look at behavioral baselines. When a loved one goes missing, there is no perfect way to grieve or react. For Annie, the silence was a shield. While the world demanded answers, she was dealing with the reality that her mother, a woman who required daily medication, was out in the desert or worse, in the hands of the individual caught on camera at 2:12 a.m. The silence wasn't a confession. It was the sound of a family holding its breath, waiting for a breakthrough that hadn't yet come. While the public eye was fixed on the family, forensic investigators were digging into the digital DNA of Nancy's home. For days, it was believed that the security cameras had failed entirely, leaving a black hole in the timeline between Nancy's return at 9:50 p.m. and the 911 call the next morning. However, the FBI's Operational Technology Division eventually pulled a ghost from the machine, residual data stored in the back-end systems of the Nest Doorbell camera. The footage, once recovered, provided a chilling factual counter-narrative to the theory that this was an inside job. At approximately 1:47 a.m., a masked figure appeared on the porch. This was not a family member. This was a calculated predator. The individual was seen wearing a black 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack and carrying what appeared to be a holstered handgun with unique characteristics. In a sequence that looked like something out of a horror film, the suspect reached out a gloved hand, tampered with the device, and eventually disconnected it entirely. The most haunting moment occurred at 2:12 a.m., when the system's software detected motion one final time. Though the video was not saved due to a lack of an active subscription, the metadata confirmed a presence at the door. Shortly after, at 2:28 a.m., Nancy's pacemaker app, linked to her smartphone, disconnected. This was a critical factual pivot. It suggested that whatever occurred happened within a 41-minute window in the dead of night. For Annie Guthrie, this footage was both a relief and a new kind of terror. It factually shifted the status of the prime suspect from those who loved Nancy to a nameless, masked intruder who had potentially cased the home on previous nights. However, the shadow of suspicion is long. Even as the FBI released these images, theorists pointed to the fact that the intruder seemed to know exactly where the cameras were. In the world of high-stakes investigations, every answer only births more questions. How did this stranger know the layout? And why, despite this footage, was the family's car still being held as part of the evidence? While the doorbell footage provided a digital silhouette of a suspect, the physical evidence at Nancy's Tucson home told a far more violent story. As investigators moved past the exterior, they were met with a sight that fundamentally changed the nature of the case from a missing person to a violent abduction. On the front porch, and near the entryway, forensic teams discovered a trail of bloodstains. Factually, on February 5, 2026, Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos confirmed that DNA testing proved the blood belonged to Nancy Guthrie. For Annie and the rest of the family, this was a devastating blow. It stripped away the hope that Nancy might have simply wandered off or suffered a medical episode that led her to leave the house voluntarily. The presence of her blood at the threshold of her own home was an undeniable sign of a struggle. It suggested that the 84-year-old grandmother, despite her limited mobility, had been forcibly removed from her sanctuary. The scrutiny on Annie Guthrie intensified during this period for a very specific, though often misunderstood investigative reason: the access and alibi phase. In a house with no signs of a shattered window or a kicked-in back door, only a front door that appeared to have been pried, detectives must ask who else had a key. Who knew the code to the security system? Who knew that Nancy would be home alone that night? As the daughter who had just dropped her off, Annie was factually the person with the most intimate knowledge of Nancy's immediate schedule. However, the forensic details eventually began to point away from the family. Investigators found low-level DNA at the scene that did not match Nancy or anyone in her inner circle. Furthermore, a white tent was erected over the front door as FBI agents meticulously combed the area for trace evidence. hair, fibers, or skin cells left behind by the masked intruder. While the public wondered if the family was being too quiet about the blood found on the porch, Annie was likely processing the horrific reality that her mother had been injured at the very door where they had said their goodbyes only hours earlier. While the forensic teams in Tucson were scrubbing the desert for physical clues, a new, more sinister front opened in the investigation: the arrival of the ransom notes. This is where the narrative surrounding Annie Guthrie and the family became most strained. According to official reports, multiple media outlets, including TMZ and local Tucson stations, received communications from individuals claiming to hold Nancy. The most shocking factual detail was the demand: $6 million in Bitcoin. The notes weren't just vague threats. They contained specific, sensitive information about Nancy's home and what she was wearing the night she disappeared, details that only someone inside the house or the immediate family would seemingly know. This led to a wave of online speculation. If the ransom note had details that weren't public, how did the sender get them? For a brief, intense window, the public's focus returned to Annie. As the person who helped Nancy get ready for dinner and saw her last, she was the primary source for what her mother was wearing. The FBI's analysis provided a different factual perspective. Cyber investigators tracked the digital footprint of these notes, and the family actually agreed to the $6 million transfer by a Monday 5 p.m. deadline. This was a strategic move, coordinated with federal agents, intended to bait the kidnapper. By agreeing to pay, the family and the FBI hoped to trace the movement of the cryptocurrency to a real-world off-ramp, where it could be converted to cash. The deadline passed on February 9, 2026, with the Bitcoin wallet remaining at a zero balance. The silence from the kidnappers after the deadline was more terrifying than the demand itself. While armchair detectives pointed to the ransom as suspiciously high for a family that, while successful, isn't typically associated with billionaire-level liquid assets, investigators noted that the masked intruder caught on camera seemed to have surveilled the home on multiple nights. The factual reality began to emerge. Nancy wasn't just a target of opportunity. She had been hunted by someone who believed her family's high profile, specifically her daughter Savannah's role at NBC, made her a valuable prize. As February progressed, the investigation moved south, away from the quiet hills of Tucson and toward the rugged terrain of Rio Rico, Arizona, a town near the Mexican border. This shift was triggered by a high-stakes tactical operation. On February 10, 2026, witnesses reported seeing a flurry of SWAT vehicles and black SUVs speeding down Interstate 19. The Pima County Sheriff's Department soon confirmed the news. A subject had been detained during a traffic stop in connection with Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. For a few frantic hours, the world believed the prime suspect had finally been caught. The news cycle exploded with rumors that the masked man from the doorbell footage was in custody. However, the factual truth was far more complicated. The individual detained was eventually identified as a local delivery driver. While he had been in the vicinity of Nancy's home and was reportedly driving a vehicle that caught the eye of surveillance teams, his family and legal representation maintained his innocence. After intensive questioning and a search of a local residence, he was released without charges. This Rio Rico diversion highlighted the immense pressure on law enforcement to find a lead. It also served as a moment of temporary relief for Annie Guthrie and her husband, Tommaso. While the public had been laser-focused on the insider theory, the Rio Rico stop proved that the FBI and Sheriff Nanos were actively pursuing external leads that stretched miles from the family home. It confirmed that the man with the backpack was a real, tangible target being hunted across southern Arizona. Yet, even as the delivery driver was cleared, the investigation remained entangled with the family's life. While one external lead went cold, the Pima County Sheriff's Department made a statement that kept the public's attention on the inner circle. They confirmed that Annie and Tommaso's vehicle was still being held as part of the investigation. This wasn't because they were suspects, Sheriff Nanos reiterated that they were officially cleared, but because the car was the last known environment where Nancy had been seen. In the world of forensic science, a car is a mobile crime scene, and until every fiber and fingerprint was accounted for, the family remained physically tied to the evidence, even if they were legally exonerated. As the investigation into Nancy Guthrie's disappearance entered its fourth week in late February 2026, the family reached a breaking point. The silence that had defined the early days of the case was replaced by a massive, high-stakes public appeal. On February 24, Savannah Guthrie, alongside her siblings Annie and Cameron, released a heartbreaking video message.
We want to thank all of you for the prayers for our beloved mom, Nancy. We feel them, and we continue to believe that she feels them too. Our mom is a kind, faithful, loyal, fiercely loving woman of goodness and light. She's funny, spunky, and clever. She has grandchildren that adore her and crowd around her and cover her with kisses. She loves fun and adventure. She is a devoted friend. She is full of kindness and knowledge. Talk to her and you'll see.
The light is missing from our lives. Nancy is our mother. We are her children. She is our beacon. She holds fast to joy in all of life's circumstances. She chooses joy day after day. Despite having already passed through great trials of pain and grief, we are always going to be merely human, just normal human people who need our mom. Mama, if you're listening, we need you to come home. We miss you.
Our mom is our heart and our home. She is 84 years old. Her health, her heart is fragile. She lives in constant pain. She is without any medicine. She needs it to survive. She needs it not to suffer. We too have heard the reports about a ransom letter in the media. As a family, we are doing everything that we can. We are ready to talk. However, we live in a world where voices and images are easily manipulated. We need to know, without a doubt, that she is alive and that you have her. We want to hear from you, and we are ready to listen. Please reach out to us.
In it, they did something unprecedented for a family under such intense scrutiny. They offered a $1 million reward for information leading to Nancy's recovery. This move was a factual turning point. By offering such a staggering sum, far surpassing the initial $50,000 offered by the FBI, the family was effectively trying to buy a lead. In the world of criminal investigation, a reward this large is designed to do one thing: flip someone. It targets the outer circle of a suspect, a roommate, a spouse, or an associate who might have seen the masked man with the Ozark Trail hiker pack or heard him bragging about the $6 million Bitcoin ransom demand. For Annie Guthrie, this public pivot was particularly significant, since she was the one who had spent the final quiet hours with her mother before the abduction. Her participation in the video was a powerful rebuttal to the prime suspect rumors that continued to swirl on social media. Factually, the Pima County Sheriff's Department had already cleared her, yet true crime streamers, and amateur sleuths remained obsessed with the fact that Annie and Tommaso's vehicle remained in police custody. The family's video message wasn't just a plea, it was a psychological tactic. By speaking directly to the captors and describing Nancy as a kind, faithful, and fiercely loving woman, they were humanizing the victim. Savannah's haunting line, "Talk to her, and you'll see," was analyzed by experts as an attempt to create a bond between Nancy and her abductor, a method used to decrease the likelihood of harm. However, as February 2026 drew to a close, the $1 million remained unclaimed. The DNA from the glove found miles away was still being processed through genetic genealogy, and the Guthrie family was left in an agonizing state of limbo, having put everything they had on the table. By March 1, 2026, the investigation into Nancy Guthrie's disappearance has reached a somber crossroads. The high-octane energy of the first few weeks, marked by SWAT raids in Rio Rico, the recovery of a $6 million ransom demand, and the forensics of the 2:12 a.m. ghost, has transitioned into what investigators call the long-haul phase. The Pima County Sheriff's Department recently announced a strategic refocusing of resources. While the case is far from closed, the hundreds of officers who once combed the Catalina foothills have been replaced by a dedicated team of elite detectives and FBI specialists. The factual standing of Annie Guthrie remains unchanged. She and her husband are not, and have never been, named as suspects by law enforcement. Sheriff Chris Nanos has been forceful in his defense of the family, calling any public insinuation of their involvement wrong and cruel. The evidence, the prying marks on the door, the unidentified DNA on the recovered gloves, and the masked figure with the Ozark Trail backpack, points consistently toward an external predator. For Annie, the prime suspect, label was a shadow cast by the internet, not by the evidence. As the $1.2 million combined reward continues to sit unclaimed, the family has begun to prepare for the hardest reality of all. Savannah Guthrie's heartbreaking admission that her mother may already be gone and dancing in heaven signaled a shift from a rescue mission to a quest for closure. The case of Nancy Guthrie has become a haunting study in the digital age, a story of a grandmother's sharp mind, a daughter's final dinner, and a masked intruder who vanished into the Arizona desert. The search continues, guided no longer by the frantic pace of the first 48 hours, but by the slow, meticulous processing of over 20,000 tips. The silence that once sparked suspicion has been replaced by the Guthrie family's steadfast resolve to find the truth, whatever the cost. In the end, the facts remain as stark as the desert landscape. A door was pried, a camera was cut, and a family is still waiting for their mother to come home.